Pronounce you Chuck and Larry, Kevin James.
I just got three things to say. God bless our troops. God bless America. And gentlemen, start your engine!
Hello, all of my beautiful people. Welcome back to a new Formula 1 season. And oh boy, can I not wait to see what happens this year. New seasons, new hopes, and new drivers who can take it all in the real competition. And oh yeah, guess what? I'm not talking about F1. I'm talking about F1 Fantasy. Oh yeah, the real sport. The real competition, the one we care about. Let's bloody go, boys. We're back into it. 2023, this is my second year doing it. But basically, in this video, ahead of Bahrain, I'll be going through each driver and constructor that is worth looking at, because I will be putting them into two categories, with one category being the people I believe aren't worth using. So I'll do a quick analysis on why they aren't worth it. Although you can disagree, but basically it's just to save time on the length of the video, as if I genuinely did every driver and constructor, I would be sitting here for 40 minutes talking about them. Like, I'm being deadly serious. Like, I can already see it's been 2 minutes into the video, pre-editing. And then obviously the other group will be drivers I believe are worth looking at. And trust me, there are a lot of drivers in both of them, obviously. And then after I've done that, I'll show you my team that I've picked out, and I'll explain to you why I've chosen them. Then I'll show you my league, and I'll put up my league code. Join it. It's a public league. Let's get on it, baby. And first of all, let's get into the rules of the new F1 2023 Fantasy, as some things have changed. Let's have a look. Right, first things first. Things look a little bit different on the actual website. Now, I don't know if I'm a fan of it yet, just because I'm used to the old layout. But hey, it might grow on me, but I'm guessing they've made improvements to it. I'm hoping so. But basically, this season, you get 5 drivers and 2 constructors. So not one now, 2 constructors. But that's the thing. You still get 100 million budget. And the prices are a little bit lower, but still not as low as you'd like to see, because last year you could pick 2 big drivers, a big constructor, and then have like 3, like maybe 1 or 2 okay drivers and then 1 bad one, but was like a team leader. But this year you got to really think about who you're putting in those driver positions and the constructor positions. But I like that because it adds more variety, because I thought what F1 Fantasy was missing compared to other fantasies like Football Fantasy was there just wasn't enough variety. You just got 1 constructor. You didn't have that. Well, you've got the same amount of drivers, but 100 million for 1 constructor, it wasn't that good. And now you really have to think about what constructors you want. And if you want to get the big boys, then that means you have to really suffer on the drivers. And now, is that worth it? I'll get onto later in the video. But anyway, let's actually get into the juicy stuff where I talk about who not to use first. First off, I think the big name to steer clear of, funnily enough, is Lando Norris. Now, you guys might be thinking, you're absolutely crazy. You love Lando Norris. Why the hell would you not pick him? One reason. Ted Kravitz, all of the media have put McLaren 8th or 9th in the constructors' standings, which is dreadful. And now, when we're playing F1 Fantasy, when a driver that costs 11.2 million, is in the 8th or 9th best car, you got to steer clear of him. I love you, Lando, but it goes for the next person I'm about to talk about, steer clear. And the next person I'm going to talk about is Oscar Piastri. Basically, sorry McLaren fans, I am a McLaren fan myself, but steer clear of these boys. Now, Oscar Piastri is only 7 million, so it's much more worth getting him. But if McLaren is going to be the 8th or 9th best car, now obviously we have no idea until we get to Bahrain, but this is coming off good sources. I'll show you all of the sources I've got this from, where they put them in the rankings. It's just not worth it, considering you have Haas drivers you can get for cheaper, and you've got Alfa Romeo drivers that you can get for cheaper. So steer clear of McLaren and steer clear of both of their drivers. Now, onto a big boy that I would say steer clear of, again, because of the money. He's worth 23.7 million, and his name is Lewis Hamilton. I could see why people would want to pick him, just because, you know, he's a big name in F1. You'd think he's always going to get consistent points. He's in a Mercedes. What could go wrong? But if we're going off last season, and apparently Mercedes are going to be fighting Aston Martin for the 3rd place in this season, I just don't see the point in paying 23.7 million for a single driver when Ferrari, the 2nd best constructor on the list, is 22.1 million. Now, I know which one I'd rather pick, but hey, it does not seem worth it to pick Lewis Hamilton. And again, that goes for his teammate and constructor, Mercedes, and George Russell. 18.6 million for George Russell. Again, too expensive, less expensive than Lewis Hamilton. So if you wanted to go for a Mercedes driver, go for George Russell. But again, not worth it for the price tag. And again, 25.1 million for a Mercedes, where we don't even know if they're going to be better than Aston Martin. Not worth it, considering that's a quarter of your balance. When you could get Ferrari for less, you could get Aston Martin for less. And I mean, I wouldn't get Alpine preferably myself, but Alpine is still 15 million less. So I'd rather get Alpine over Mercedes at this point. So yeah, steer clear of George Russell and Mercedes. Now, onto the first, I would say, typical lower midfield driver that you'd go for. And his name is Nick de Vries. Now, the reason I have done this is because of multiple reasons. Now, 5 million, yes, he is cheap, so he is a good differential if you want to go for someone differential. And I'm looking at it right now, he's 28% picked. And I can see why, because he's new in the sport, he's talented. I've got a video out coming on him in a week. So it's worth giving it a punt if you want someone different. But, here's the big but. 5 million for an AlphaTauri driver. AlphaTauri are looking 8th or 9th as well. They're looking where McLaren's are. And I just think when you could even just get Yuki Tsunoda, who is technically the team leader now at AlphaTauri, for cheaper. You could get Guan Yu Zhou, who I've slated a lot, but his car's apparently the 6th or 7th best car. I'd rather take Guan Yu Zhou over Nick de Vries, especially when Guan Yu Zhou's cheaper. So I just think for Nick de Vries, he's a rookie driver. You don't know how good he's going to be yet, especially in an AlphaTauri that's apparently not going to be very well. I just think there's cheaper drivers that would do better, and there's slightly more expensive drivers that would do better as well. Now, I've just said he's a decent driver to pick over Nick de Vries, but I'm still putting Guan Yu Zhou in my no-no list. And this is purely because I think, again, if you're going to get someone for cheap in a lower mid-table team, I believe Yuki Tsunoda or Nico Hülkenberg is a better choice because they are just cheaper. Yuki Tsunoda's the technically team leader, so he will be getting those teammate points, I believe, because I don't think Nick de Vries will instantly be amazing at F1. And also Nico Hülkenberg in a Haas, I think he can do bits. I think he'll definitely be getting into Q2 all the time, which I don't think Guan Yu Zhou will be doing every time. But I will say, on my no list, Guan Yu Zhou was right at the bottom because I think he really is right in the middle between yes or no, because I think in an Alfa Romeo he could do well, especially with how cheap he is. So I don't think he's the worst choice to pick. It's just, in my opinion, Tsunoda and Hülkenberg are both better options and they're cheaper. So yeah. Then moving on to the final person who is in my don't pick list would be Logan Sargent. And again, for similar reasons to Nick de Vries, he's a rookie in not a very good Williams, so you're not going to be beating your teammate Albon. Yes, he's 4 million, so if you really wanted to get two fancy drivers and then really cheap out on your last 3 drivers, then yes, Logan Sargent, I'd see why you'd get him, but I think it's just he won't get enough points for me for him to look like an attractive option. So yeah, that's the end of the no list. Let's go on to constructors you cannot use. Now, I've talked about the first two, McLaren and Mercedes. Again, too expensive. McLaren looking like they're going to be 8th or 9th. Mercedes like they're going to be 3rd or 4th. No point in picking either of those two. I think it'd be very silly to pick either of those two yet. It'd be high risk, low reward, considering if you just get a Ferrari instead of a Mercedes, you get the same points or more, and they're cheaper. And again, with McLaren, I think if you're going for a McLaren constructor, I don't see why you wouldn't get Aston Martin, who are 6.7 million. and they're looking like they're the third best car. Bear in mind, Aston Martin, what a fucking bargain that is. I'll start talking about that later. But yeah, it's just really not looking good for those two teams. And then again, I wouldn't pick Haas. I wouldn't pick Alfa Romeo. I wouldn't pick AlphaTauri, and I wouldn't pick Williams. Basically, I wouldn't pick any team lower than 5th in the rankings, purely because in F1 Fantasy, if you did not know, the constructors, basically your points are the tally of both drivers. So if you had Red Bull, you'd get the points of Perez and Verstappen, and it's the most you're going to get out of your money. So for constructors, you need big cars. You need the top 3. And for now, we don't really know who's going to be 3rd or 4th. With the only 2 cars we know that are definitely going to be in the top 3 are Red Bull and Ferrari, which are my top 2 to get. But we'll move on to that later. But first, let's talk about the drivers that I believe you should pick for your team. Now, first off, Max Verstappen. He's the most expensive player in the game, but he's got a 57% picked rate, and there's a reason for that. The reason is I believe he's going to win the championship again. It's looking like the Red Bull is dangerous again this season. There's no reason not to skimp out on him. Best driver in the league at the minute for points. Get him in your team. Now, next up is Charles Leclerc, 2nd in the Drivers' Championship last season. Very good second option. Again, I just don't think his price tag is worth it. 21.2 million. I feel like if you just spend an extra 5 million on Max Verstappen, it's much more worth it. But again, it's more worth getting him over both Mercedes drivers and Perez and Sainz, as I believe he is better than all of them. Again, I believe Fernando Alonso is a fantastic choice to get, as he is 8.3 million. He knows F1 like the back of his hand. He's been in the sport since Jesus was born, and he's in an Aston Martin that's competitive. What more could you need from this man? 8.3 million. He's a bargain. Get him in your team. I swear to God, he's got a 68% pick rate. I think that's the highest picked rate in fantasy. If you don't have him in your team, you're crazy. He is the best driver to have in the league. Then we go on to Pierre Gasly. I believe he is the better choice over Ocon, as he is cheaper. He's only 8 million for an Alpine driver. Good choice. He's cheap. He's in a top 5 car. Perfect choice for you to get if you're on a budget. Now, Valtteri Bottas, again, he's on my lower list of this yes list, purely because 7.8 million, that's good for Valtteri Bottas, but the Alfa Romeo doesn't look as good as it did at the start of last season. And he did sort of drop off at the end of last season. So I just think there's better drivers who are the same price, like Alonso, Gasly, Lance Stroll, but not for now. I'll get into why, as I'm about to say. Special occurrence for Lance Stroll. Please do not pick him. Red flag, red flag, red flag, as he is not racing in Bahrain. He had an accident. Do not pick him. Dragovic is taking his seat for that race. Now, getting back to the yes list. Kevin Magnussen, a big yes. Haas are looking like a decent car this season. He's cheap. Now, if you can't afford him though, because he is a bit above the rest of the lower table drivers, it's fine. You'd pick someone else, but Kevin Magnussen, good choice to pick. Alexander Albon, great choice. He's the team leader. He's always going to beat Logan Sargent. I'm sorry, but Logan Sargent I just don't think is F1 ready. So Albon's always going to get teammate points. He does a lot of overtaking, so he's going to get a lot of overtaking points. Now, he might lose out in Q3, but he always works miracles in that Williams. Must in your team. Then we get on to Yuki Tsunoda. Again, same situation. Team leader. I believe he will be beating Nick De Vries in most circumstances, although I might have to hold myself back on that, as you might see me placing him after Bahrain, as Nick De Vries just shows him different levels, but I really don't know yet. I don't really watch Formula E, and I don't really know how good drivers are in Formula E, so I'll have to wait to see that. But Yuki Tsunoda, great choice, also because he's cheaper than 17 of the other drivers, so great choice to put in. Only 4.8 million, and he's a bit of a differential, 8%. I've only picked him. Then onto Nico Hülkenberg, 20% picked, 4.3 million, pretty obvious. He's cheap, he's in the Haas. Yes, he probably won't be beating Magnussen for now, but it's Hülkenberg. He will work miracles, and for 4.3 million, it's better value than Tsunoda, Guan Yu Zhou, Nick De Vries, Alex Albon, and Kevin Magnussen, and he'll probably be beating them, apart from Magnussen, most race weekends. So Hülkenberg, get in your team. He is so cheap, means you can get the big constructors and not have to worry about having another driver. Massive W from F1 Fantasy putting his price that low. I have no idea why they've done that. And then we get on, that is the final person in my yes list for drivers. Now getting on to constructors, my yes list are, as you can guess, Red Bull Racing, 46% picked. I believe second highest pick of a constructor, 27.2 million. Yes, they are the most expensive in the league, but they are going to get you the most points. They are going to win the drivers and constructors. Mark my words. So have them in your team. Again, Ferrari, 22.1 million. They're going to be getting you third and fourth. There's no reason not to have them. I know they're still expensive, but like I said, constructors are so important in this league. I could see why Aston Martin are enticing, as they are the only other yes team I would bring in, as they are only 6.7 million and 54% people have picked them. But I just think, even still, say you picked Aston Martin over Ferrari, yeah? The driver you could bring in instead is Charles Leclerc if you had Aston Martin as your constructor. But again, like I said, how good constructors are, I still believe that it's better to have Ferrari as a constructor, as third and fourth will still get you a shit ton of points more than fifth and sixth will. But we'll see what happens. But yes, my 3 teams to pick are Red Bull Racing, Ferrari and Aston Martin. I'd steer clear from the rest of them. Now, getting onto my team and who have I picked? Well, if you've been listening carefully, you would see sort of what my team is looking like at the minute. But for my team, drivers, I've got Max Verstappen coming in first. Basically, like I said, he's also got my 2 times points because he's gonna win the championship unless he has engine failure or anything like that, anything basically unlucky. He will be getting you points. Must at the 2 times. But he is the only expensive driver I've had. As Fernando Alonso up next, as I think he'll work miracles in that Aston Martin, but I don't think it's enough for me to get the actual constructor Aston Martin. Then we've got Alex Albon, Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg, purely because they are 3 cheap options which then allow me to get my constructors, which are Red Bull and Ferrari, purely because I believe they're going to get first, second, third and fourth. Don't know in what order, but they're going to be at the top. And constructors, man, they get you the most points. I remember last season you'd get almost double the points from your constructors than your drivers, so they're so important, must have. But again, if you want to go Aston Martin because they're cheap and you can bring in like a Charles Leclerc who maybe would get you more points than Albon, Tsunoda or Hülkenberg, I don't blame you. I have thought about getting rid of Tsunoda, bringing in Aston Martin and bringing in Charles Leclerc, but for now I think I'm going to keep that way. Unless Ferrari are worse than I think they are, it will stay that way. But that is my team. And now, the final thing to talk about is my league. And here is my code. I'll be showing it on the screen now. Join it, boys and girls. We'll have a good laugh. Everyone loves a league. We'll be very competitive. I'll do what I did last year, where I have my top pick for the weekend and my bottom pick for the weekend. So hey, make sure you don't get bottom. But don't worry, I don't slate people that bad. I give them advice what to do to change their teams with the 2 free transfers. And yeah, it's all fun and games. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video of me having an in-depth talk ahead of Bahrain for what team you should pick on F1 Fantasy. And hey, love you lots. See you after Bahrain, boys and girls.